Right now, as you're watching this video, there is a US-born cartel operator actively hunting down and eliminating rival gang members across the Tijuana to Cali border corridor, and almost nobody outside of Mexico is talking about him. His name is Franklin Ernesto Hueso Hernandez, but on the streets of Tijuana, they call him El Ranchero. And here's the wildest part. This guy wasn't born in some remote mountain village in Sinaloa. He wasn't raised in the cartel lifestyle deep in the Mexican Sierra. No, this man was born in California, raised in the United States, and right now he is one of the most feared and active operators inside the Sinaloa Cartel's the Maíza faction, running a private army of hitmen, controlling drug distribution across entire zones of one of Mexico's most dangerous cities, and personally orchestrating a campaign of kidnappings, torture, and executions to consolidate power along the US-Mexico border. And in late 2025, after a rival cartel boss got executed in Tecate, El Ranchero didn't lay low. He didn't wait to see what would happen. He went on the offense, hunting down every single one of that dead boss's former operatives, disappearing them, torturing them, and either forcing them to join his ranks or putting them in the ground. 133 homicides in Tijuana in January 2026 alone, and El Ranchero's fingerprints are all over it. So how does a California-born kid end up running one of the most violent cartel cells on the US-Mexico border? Let me break it down for you, because the story of El Ranchero is something that'll make you question everything you think you know about how these organizations actually operate. And trust me, you're gonna want to stay until the end, because this story is far from over. Before we get into everything, let me paint the picture of what's actually happening in Tijuana right now, because without that context, you won't fully understand why El Ranchero matters. Tijuana has always been a battleground. It sits right on the border between Baja California and San Diego, California, which makes it one of the most strategically valuable pieces of real estate in the entire narco world. Whoever controls Tijuana controls the flow of drugs, weapons, and people crossing into the United States. We're talking billions of dollars in product moving through that corridor every single year. For a long time, the Arellano Felix organization, the old Tijuana cartel, ran things. Then the Sinaloa Cartel started pushing in. Then the CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, started flexing their muscles. And today, in 2025 and 2026, that city is a three-way war zone where bodies drop in broad daylight, narco messages get left on corpses, and entire neighborhoods live under the control of armed criminal cells. That's the environment El Ranchero stepped into. That's the stage he chose to operate on. And here's what makes him different from the average cartel operator. El Ranchero didn't just plug into an existing structure and follow orders. He built something. He created his own branded armed force. He established his own identity within the Sinaloa Cartel's hierarchy. And he did it fast, going from a relatively unknown man to one of the most wanted and most feared figures in all of Baja California in just a few years. But to really understand how this all went down, we gotta go back to the beginning. We gotta talk about California, about growing up between two worlds, and about the moment a young man named Franklin Ernesto Hueso Hernandez decided which world he was going to choose. Let's rewind. Let's go back to California. Now here's the thing, the specific details of El Ranchero's early life are not fully documented in public records, and that's actually not surprising. Most cartel operators at his level are careful about their paper trail. They don't want their childhood schools, their old neighborhoods, their families' names floating around in articles and court documents. That's basic survival in that world. But what we do know, what Mexican authorities and investigative journalists from outlets like Semanario Zeta have confirmed, is that Franklin Ernesto Hueso Hernandez was born in the United States. California, and that fact alone is significant because it puts him in a very specific and very valuable category inside the cartel world. See, being born in the US means you have something most cartel operators don't: freedom of movement. You can cross that border legally. You have documentation. You can travel, move product, hold meetings, and disappear back across the line in a way that someone born in Mexico simply cannot. US citizenship or legal residency is like a golden ticket in the narco world, and the cartels have known this for decades. Think about it. El Mencho's own son, El Menchito, was born in San Francisco, California. El Mencho's stepson was born in Orange County. The cartels have been strategically placing family members and operators in the United States for years, understanding that American-born members offer a logistical advantage that money alone can't buy. Now, where exactly in California El Ranchero was born and how his family ended up there, those details haven't been fully confirmed by sources. What we can say is that, like many children of Mexican immigrant families, he grew up straddling two cultures, two languages, and two very different worlds. On one side, American society, schools, neighborhoods. On the other side, deep ties to Mexico, the family, to a culture that in some border communities is inseparable from the influence of organized crime. This is important because it explains something about El Ranchero that makes him particularly dangerous. He understands both sides of the border. He knows how Americans think. He knows how Mexicans operate. He can move in both spaces with a comfort level that most cartel members simply don't have. Now here's where it gets real. At some point, El Ranchero made a choice. He didn't go the route of college or a trade or building a legitimate life on the American side. He went south. He went to Tijuana, and he went to work for the Sinaloa Cartel. The exact timeline of when he first got plugged in isn't fully documented. But by September 2021, when a Narco message publicly placed his name in the criminal landscape of Baja California, El Ranchero was already established enough to be called out by rivals. You don't make it onto a cartel narco message unless you're already somebody, unless you've already put in work, unless you're already a threat. And by May 2022, his footprint in Tijuana was undeniable. That's when authorities first began tracking operatives directly connected to him. Hitmen he brought in from other Mexican states specifically to wage war against the CJNG in Tijuana's Central and Norte zones. This is where things started getting serious. So let's talk about what El Ranchero actually built, because this isn't a guy who showed up and just worked for somebody else. From very early on, he was constructing his own criminal infrastructure within the larger Sinaloa Cartel framework. By the time he emerged publicly in 2021, El Ranchero had already positioned himself within the Arce Brothers cell, one of the most powerful factions of the Sinaloa Cartel operating in Baja California. The Arce Brothers run what's known as La Maiza, the faction loyal to Ismael El Mayo Zambada's side of the Sinaloa Cartel. And in the hierarchy of La Maiza in the Zona Costa of Baja California, El Ranchero became one of the top operational commanders. But here's what really set him apart from other operators at his level. He branded himself. He created Las Fuerzas Especiales Ranchero, the FER, his own private military force operating under a name and identity that was directly tied to him personally. His sicarios wore tactical vests with the letters FER stitched right on the chest. They had uniforms, they had structure, they moved like a paramilitary unit, not a street gang. Think about what that means strategically. When you brand your enforcers, you're sending a message to every rival, every undecided drug dealer, every local criminal in the area. There is a force here with an identity, with a chain of command, with a name that carries weight. It's psychological warfare on top of actual warfare. And the actual warfare, no cap, it was brutal. El Ranchero's primary enemies in Tijuana were the CJNG and what remained of the Aliano Felix cartel. In the Centro and Norte zones of Tijuana, these groups were competing for control of the retail drug market, the Narco menudo, which is the street-level distribution of drugs. Now you might think, okay, street-level drug dealing, that's small time. But in a city like Tijuana, where you have hundreds of thousands of people and a constant flow of tourists and border crossers, the Narco menudo generates millions of dollars. Control those zones, and you control a massive revenue stream. El Ranchero's FER went after rival dealers and enforcers with extreme aggression. His operatives were documented kidnapping rival narco-menudistas, street dealers working for the CJNG and the KAF, and subjecting them to torture, not just to eliminate them, but to flip them, to force them to switch allegiances, to say to them, you can either work for El Ranchero or you can die. That was the pitch. And look, some took the deal, some got recruited, and those who didn't, they disappeared. Their bodies were found later, often with narco messages attached. By mid-2024, El Ranchero's cell had established violent dominance over key parts of Tijuana's Centro and Norte zones. His people were controlling drug sales, collecting taxes from independent dealers, and running extortion operations against local businesses. The FER was conducting operations in broad daylight. kidnappings in public spaces, shootouts on city streets, with an audacity that shocked even seasoned observers of Tijuana's cartel wars. But that's not even the crazy part. In December 2024, 3 women were found dead in Tijuana with a Narco message directed specifically at El Ranchero. Not from a random rival, a targeted message. Someone was sending him a very specific signal. And what does that tell you? It tells you that by late 2024, El Ranchero had become prominent enough that rivals were specifically addressing him. He wasn't just an anonymous operator anymore. He was a named target, a principal in the war. Now fast forward to 2025, the Sinaloa Cartel itself had been going through massive internal turmoil. El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, had essentially betrayed El Mayo's Embada, luring him to a meeting in Mexico and arranging his extradition to the United States in 2024. That move shattered the Sinaloa Cartel's internal peace and ignited a civil war within the organization itself. Los Chapitos' faction versus La Maiza, El Mayo's people. El Ranchero, he was La Maiza all the way. He operated under the Arce brothers, who were loyal to El Mayo's side. So the external war against the CJNG and the KFF was now running simultaneously with an internal Sinaloa civil war. 2 fronts, multiple enemies, and El Ranchero was right in the middle of it. By 2025, his primary rival in Tijuana on the external front was a CJNG-aligned operator named Javier Adrian Beltran Cabrera, El Pedrito. These 2 men, El Ranchero of the Sinaloa Cartel and El Pedrito of the CJNG, were locked in a war for Tijuana that was generating body counts that shocked even hardened crime journalists. According to Seminario Zeta, the conflict between El Ranchero and El Pedrito contributed to 133 homicides in Tijuana in the single month of January 2026. Let that number sink in. 133 people killed in 1 month in one city. That's more than 4 people every single day. And El Ranchero's organization was directly responsible for a significant portion of that violence. On November 1st, 2025, a Sinaloa Cartel boss named Alejandro Cando Castañeda was executed in Tecate, Baja California. Tecate is a smaller city in Baja California, about 35 miles east of Tijuana, right on the US border, actually right across from a small community in San Diego County. Strategically, it's an important point on the border corridor. When Castañeda got hit, it created an immediate power vacuum. His crew, his operatives, his street-level commanders, they were suddenly without a boss. And a group of his former operatives, protected by a command of about 20 armed men, apparently decided they were going to go freelance. They were going to operate independently in Tecate without swearing allegiance to anyone in the Arce brothers structure. In that world, that's not just disrespect. That's a direct threat to the criminal order. El Ranchero's response was immediate and savage. Along with another La Maiza operator named Rafael Yocopicio, alias El Cabezon, El Ranchero launched a campaign to hunt down every single one of Castañeda's former people. The orders came directly from above, from the Arce brothers themselves. The message was clear: these former operatives either get aligned or they get eliminated. But here's what made this particular campaign especially chilling. El Ranchero and El Cabezon weren't just killing these people, they were disappearing them. People were being grabbed off the streets of Tecate, tortured for information, and then either forced to join the structure or killed. In December 2025 alone, 33 young people from Tecate were reported disappeared. 33 people. In 1 month, in a relatively small border city, El Ranchero's forces were specifically targeting key figures from Castañeda's old crew. Oscar Lopez, known as El Chicho, who controlled the urban zone of Tecate. Jose Aje Flores Ayala, known as El Siete, who operated drug trafficking specifically in the zone between Tecate and the United States border, and Salomon Barragan, another key figure in the old network. These men were being hunted, and for El Ranchero, this wasn't just about punishing disloyalty. This was about territory acquisition. Tecate's border crossing point represents a direct line into the United States, into California specifically. Control Tecate and you control another avenue for product to move north. For a California-born operator with connections on both sides of the border, That is an extraordinarily valuable piece of real estate. The first major documented law enforcement action directly linked to El Ranchero's network came in January 2026, when Mexican authorities arrested a group of 4 heavily armed individuals in Tijuana. The group was carrying 4 firearms, including 2 AR-style rifles, pistols, tactical uniforms, and multiple loaded magazines. When they were detained, they told police exactly who they worked for: Franklin Ernesto Huzo Hernandez, El Ranchero. No hesitation, they said the name. That tells you something about the culture El Ranchero has built. His people aren't afraid to say who they work for. That name carries weight. That name is supposed to intimidate. Also on January 2026, authorities seized a significant weapons cache linked to the FER tactical vests bearing the FER insignia were among the confiscated materials. The Mexican government described the seizure as part of ongoing operations to weaken the armed capacity of organized crime along the northern border. But El Ranchero himself has not been arrested. He remains operational. He remains free. And that's consistent with how these organizations work. The foot soldiers get caught. The people wearing the vests, carrying the guns, sitting at the drug sales points, they're the ones who end up in handcuffs. The operators sitting above them, communicating through layers of intermediaries, moving between locations, that person is much harder to touch. In September 2025, 2 alleged recruiters from the Cabo 24 cell, a unit linked directly to El Ranchero's network, were arrested in a coordinated operation involving 4 separate Mexican security agencies working together. 4 agencies on one operation, targeting members of El Ranchero's organization. That level of coordination tells you how seriously Mexican authorities are taking this specific network. The detained recruits confirmed what intelligence had been suggesting. Their role was to kidnap rival narco menudistas, torture them into submission, and forcibly recruit them. Join or die, executed with military-style efficiency by an organization that had developed systematic processes for expansion through coercion. The human cost of all of this on ordinary Tijuana and Tecate residents has been devastating. Entire neighborhoods have been turned into battlegrounds. Businesses face extortion. Residents face the constant threat of getting caught in crossfire. Young men face pressure to join up or get out of the way. And many of the people inside El Ranchero's FER aren't there because they wanted to be. They're there because armed men showed up and told them their only choices were to work for the organization or die. That's not recruitment, that's forced conscription at gunpoint. So let's zoom out. Let's talk about what the story of El Ranchero actually means in a bigger context. El Ranchero is not unique in being a US-born individual operating within Mexican cartels. El Menchito was born in San Francisco and is now serving life in federal prison. El Mencho's stepson was born in Orange County. The Gulf Cartel had US-born operators, but what makes El Ranchero's case particularly significant for this moment in 2025 and 2026 is the environment he's operating in. The Trump administration designated the CJNG and the Sinaloa Cartel as terrorist organizations in February 2025. There is active US government pressure on Mexico to take stronger action. And in the middle of all that political and law enforcement pressure, a California-born man is building a cartel empire in Tijuana, right across the fence from San Diego. An American-born cartel operator has capabilities that make them structurally more dangerous in certain ways. They can potentially travel to the US legally. They may have contacts and infrastructure on the American side. They understand American law enforcement from a cultural standpoint that their counterparts who grew up entirely in Mexico do not. And they may have access to financial systems and legal structures on the US side that can be used to support cartel operations. On the Sinaloa Cartel internal war front, the resolution of the La Maíza versus Los Chapitos conflict will have direct implications for El Ranchero. If La Maíza consolidates power, El Ranchero, as one of their most active and effective regional operators, potentially rises within the hierarchy. If Los Chapitos gain the upper hand nationally, his position becomes more precarious. But operators who build their own branded military forces, who establish their own identities, who control specific territories and revenue streams, they don't go away easily just because the organization above them shifts. El Ranchero has made himself valuable. He has made himself difficult to replace. He has built something that has its own momentum. The story of El Ranchero is ultimately the story of the modern cartel world. It's the story of an organization so sophisticated that it can identify a California kid bring him into its orbit, develop him as an operator, and deploy him as a regional commander with his own branded paramilitary force. All while 133 people a month die in one city, and the political conversation between two governments goes in circles. He went from California to Tijuana and built an empire of violence in under 5 years. He created his own army, he put Tecate in his crosshairs and went after it methodically. He is right now one of the most active and dangerous operators on the entire US-Mexico border, and almost nobody on the American side knows his name. Today, Franklin Ernesto Hueso Hernandez, El Ranchero, remains at large. His Fuerzas Especiales Ranchero continue to operate. The war with El Petrito and the CJNG continues. The hunting of Castaneda's former operatives continues, and the question of whether authorities will eventually get their hands on him remains open. What's not open is the reality of what he represents. A new generation of cartel operator, born in the United States, shaped by two worlds, and building power in the borderlands where those two worlds collide. The border was supposed to separate two countries. For El Ranchero, it's his greatest advantage.